Good evening. I'm Stanley Pacion, and I'd like to continue this series of historical essays on sex in antiquity and sex in the ancient world, by now referring to Love and Sex in Nero's Court, or as I've entitled it, The Life of Nero, Sex and the Fall of the Roman Empire. Let me begin by reading from it. Nero's sexual excesses led to corruption of all Roman institutions. This article represents an historical essay which was originally published in the medical journal, Medical Aspects of Human Sexuality, Volume 5, March 1971, pages 170 to 185. The journal is now defunct, and its availability is severely circumscribed because it is usually found in the archives, stacks of university, medical libraries, where access to the general public is often denied. Still, I was pleasantly surprised to find some online references to this article, and I have taken the opportunity to edit and rewrite the essay, but I have also tried to retain its original content and style. The best source of information regarding Nero is on the lives of the Caesars, or as it is commonly known by its English title, The 12 Caesars, by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, known over the generations as Suetonius. These are all highlighted things. So if you go to the article itself, you'll be able to refer to the links and get to know who these people were at length. This expose of personal lives of the first 12 Roman emperors shocks readers even today. Suetonius' depiction of Nero's sexual exploit border, and some will argue, transcend the pornographic. In older translations of this work, parts of the life of Nero are either deleted, asterisks mark off the censored passages, or they are left in the original, a practice which induced many a schoolboy to improve his Latin. Generally speaking, Suetonius' history can be described as very lascivious, gossipy, filled with great storytelling, and often downright funny. Those readers who follow the links above know just how relatively few are the actual sources to the lives of the Caesars, especially those at the helm during the earlier years of the Roman Empire. As has so often been remarked, the triumph of barbarism in Christianity was relatively complete. The libraries of antiquity and the writings of the ancient essayists and historians were destroyed. The monks simply scraped off the writings from the lambskin parchments before them and replaced the ancient script with the new ecclesiastical doctrine. Then, when the next scribe came along, he merely scraped off the writings of the previous scribe and rewrote the same or similar passage either from or about Scripture on the now blank parchment. So on and so on. The operating principle here was not the preservation of historical scripts or Scripture, but a maxim which held that idle hands were the devil's tools. Also, another point in fact, the barbarian tribes which crossed the borders of the empire were largely illiterate, and so were their commanders-in-chief. They burned and they pillaged. There is no way to describe how long this era of absolute destruction reigned until one remembers that most of the knowledge of classical antiquity remained lost to Western Europeans until its rebirth in Italy well nigh 1,000 years later during the 13th and 14th century, a period which is commonly called the Renaissance. Readers will find me addressing my credentials when I comment on this period of ancient Roman history and my account of love and sex during Julius Caesar's political rise and subsequent seizure of power. But for now, my sense of Roman history and society during Nero's times for the purpose of this article rests on the text that has come down to us from Suetonius. Historians to the person remarked that the history of Nero's reign is highly conjectural, because no historical sources have survived which were contemporaneous with Nero's period. In a word, no primary sources from Nero's court remain. Actually, there is nothing surprising in the central fact. We know that so much of the literature from all of antiquity had been lost anyway. I will continue this account of Nero's court with an schoolbook exercise called or commonly referred to as the explanation of the text. There is no doubt that Suetonius does retain the book knowledge, then extant in the ancient world libraries, and that was preserved in the oral tradition. It is true that he was a member of the patrician class, and that this group had suffered terribly in the hands of Nero and his guards. No doubt Suetonius, like so many other Romans, had an axe to grind when it came to his account for the emperor, but his is one of the only historical accounts remaining. The 12 Caesars remains one of the most famous books to reach us from classical antiquity. So it is to Suetonius' chapter on Nero that I turn to abstract the quality and the meaning of life of the Roman court during the mid-part of the 1st century, during our common era. I entitled this next section, Good Boy Gone Bad. When Suetonius begins his account of Nero's life, he sets the theme as a relatively good life, even a good man gone bad. Whatever the eventual consequences of his reign, the best intentions mark Nero's first years as emperor. Suetonius writes, He promised his rule on the principles. He promised to model his rule on the principles laid down by Caesar Augustus. Never missed an opportunity of being generous or merciful. He lowered taxes, strengthened the economy, lessened the severity of Roman jurisprudence, and, through his influence and money, provided for a general cultural renaissance in Rome. For Suetonius, the cause of this transformation of Nero's rule from virtue to depravity, violence, and unmitigated squander was sexual. His theme about sexual excess, ever-mounting desires, its insatiability, and its ultimate regression into absolute depravity repeats itself time and again in Suetonius' account. I might personally argue that it is Suetonius himself who can be held responsible for Christianity's long-time play on the selfsame theme in the literature of the saints. Early Christian writers, almost to the man, argued that once engaged, the carnal lust multiplied and in the end led to personal destruction and woe to all in the company of depravity. The young handsome boy, obsessed by music, meaning the young handsome boy meaning Nero, he played the lyre, the theater, art, and given to public recitals of his poems, began to hold great dinner parties to which he invited prostitutes. What followed is a horrifying account of the rapacity and the extremes of sexuality. Nero's life once again extremes of sexuality. Nero's life once again marches to illustrate Suetonius' central theme. The desire for carnal pleasure multiplies, ultimately leads to perversion. Though the young Nero's first experiments with debauchery were relatively mild, his sexual appetite soon drove him through the catalog of lusts. And this is a quotation now. Not satisfied with seducing freeborn boys and married women, Nero raped the Vestal Virgin Rubria. Having tried to turn the boy Sporus into a girl by castration, he went through a wedding ceremony with him, dowry, bridal veil, and all, which the whole court attended, then treated him as a wife. He dressed Sporus in the fine clothes normally worn by an empress and took him in his own litter, not only to every Greek assize and fair, but actually to the streets of Images at Rome, kissing him amorously now and then. A rather amusing joke is still going the rounds. The world would have been a far happier place had Nero's father, Domitius, married that sort of wife. Thank you, and I'll soon record part 2.